So when I designed this system, I had to make some important decisions about how much patching I wanted to do and leave so that the system can be used without repatching anything, and how many controllers and extra modules I wanted to throw into the mix. Essentially, when we think about building a polyphonic modular, it doesn't take very long until we end up into a situation of diminishing returns. Obviously, it ends up becoming very, very expensive because we've got a lot of rather expensive polyphonic modules and a lot of cables that have to be plugged in. But in my case, I've got a lot of support modules. I ended up spending quite a bit just to add all kinds of other switches, crossfaders, balance faders, mults. There's all sorts of things going on that are kind of behind the scene that help make the instrument playable without me having to continually be patching and changing cables. The reason for this is I was trying to construct something that would do dual duty for me. I wanted an instrument that I could get to sound like a little polysynth from yesteryear and would be authentic and analog sounding, but would be flexible, had multi-mode filters, had layers to it, and let me kind of modulate anything with anything else. But at the same time, I wanted to be able to pull it apart and use the modules in other projects like I did last year in the Netherlands with the Krelberg performance, where essentially I built a single 4-voice polyphonic instrument that I controlled with a whole other series of controllers from my big rack. So it was kind of a Frankenstein of this instrument and another instrument all assembled to create something new. And then the other thing that I'm able to do with this instrument as it's set up is I can go and I can inject voltages from my other system into this. So I've always got the ability to lift out some cables, or there's lots of places where I can go and inject in audio or inject in voltages and then make patching and controller changes to what's going on here without having to alter it very, very much. But it was certainly a lot of planning in terms of deciding how many cables do I want, because the more cables you end up with, the more obscured the instrument is. It becomes hard to use because you simply can't reach through all these cables to change things, which is partially why I've instituted a bunch of passive controllers sitting in front of it, so I've got access to the main important knobs that I would like to control as I play. But it really becomes a trade-off. How many extra utility modules do you want to buy, and how many cables do you want to have set up? Or do you want to go with something smaller and lighter, because you can certainly save a lot of money and create a Doepfer polyphonic system with just the interface, a single VCO, single VCF, and ADSR to control the VCF, and ADSR to control a single amp, and then you can come right out of that single out. It's relatively inexpensive, and it'll give you a 4-voice, single oscillator, single filter, polyphonic modular for quite a bit less than you would expect. So really about 50% of my cost in this project was things like the switch, just so that I wouldn't have to be repatching from my pulse width modulation, or things like all of the faders, or the cross faders that I've got in here, so that I don't have to be moving a bunch of patch cables. I can just turn some switches, change some cross faders, and then I can choose whatever filter type I want, or, inverted ADSRs or not, and do all of that without having to unplug it. But it is certainly a very daunting task. And to anybody that's getting into patching a polyphonic modular, what I would suggest is get ready for a little bit of headaches, because it's very easy to make a simple mistake whereby you kind of mix up the outputs somewhere along the line. So for example, if I have a simple patch set up with an oscillator, filter, ADSR, and an amp with an ADSR, if I patch one of the gates from the interface to the wrong gate in on the ADSR that controls the final amplifier. As I play the instrument, it'll sound very confusing, and I'll press a key, but I'll actually hear a different pitch, and it can be really tricky to troubleshoot those little problems. So I've done things like color-coded, where I just put a little bit of colored nail polish on the end of cables so that I have a color coding scheme, just so that I can make sure that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 set up all the way across. But it also means that it isn't the kind of thing that you want to be patching and unpatching the way that you might in your basic kind of mono system, where your patches are generally going to be simpler and you don't have to worry so much about which voice is going where and which voice is doing what. All of that being said, though, I would certainly agree that the Doepfer modules are precision enough to be able to be used in this way. Like, generally, I don't have to retune this system. Once it's warmed up, it'll come back up to the tuning that I left it at, and I can get it to be quite precise tuning over, easily 6 octaves. So I don't have any problems with that. Once I've got it all tuned up, and it's easy enough to tune using the Polyphonic interface. Once I've got it tuned, it'll generally come back there. It certainly has a little bit of analog variation in terms of how much the filter's open for each voice, or the amps, or differences in each of the voices' ADSRs. But I certainly wouldn't say that it's enough to worry about. Anybody that's used to modular gear will certainly be comfortable with the range that you get out of the modules. And it's a real hoot. It's a real pleasure to be able to sit down and play chords and hear the instrument doing it all polyphonically. It's much more like sitting and playing something than it is just like patching up something that's kind of doing it all on its own. So it's a pleasure to be able to get back to two-handed playing. So to sum up, would I recommend that somebody spend all the money and take the exhaustive step of creating an instrument like this? Yes, if you're confident that you can patch up, that you can deal with literally 4 times as many patch cables, if you're confident that you can get it all patched up without any problems, or if you want to take the extra step and you're willing to do some fairly easy DIY, you can lift all these modules out of the case, and on the back of them there are pinpoints that you can add little jumper cables to, so you can jump from the interface to the ADSR, from the ADSR to the amp or to the filter, audio outs from the oscillators to the filter. You can do a lot of that without having to have the cables in the front. And then when you do plug cables in the front, then they take precedent over what's patched in the back. Doepfer has instructions for all of that in their manual, and they show you pictures how to do it. I didn't want to go that route simply because I knew that I wanted to be able to pull things out of the case or patch things around differently without having to worry about it being normaled in the back, and I intended to use a bunch of controllers with it anyway, so I didn't have to go that route. So, for most people, you may not want to go into the overkill that I've gone into. You may not want to set up it's literally 2 separate polyphonic synths that are layered to create our output. So you may not want to go to all that much effort. Maybe a single layer is going to be fine for you, and it certainly is going to sound great and get you really, really far. One of the interesting things you could look at doing is getting 2 of the new A121S stereo filters, because each of those filters can function as its own mono filter. So 2 of these would function like my 4 filters, with the benefit that you would have morphing of them. So you could use an ADSR signal to morph each of those polyphonically, and that would be a really cool, interesting sound. So it might be something worthwhile to look at. So in the end, what I've ended up creating here is a 2 oscillator, 2 filter synth with 1 low pass 24 dB oscillator, and then 1 multi-mode 12 dB filter and then ADSRs, 2 ADSRs, 1 for each of the filters, the low pass and the multi-mode, and then a 3rd ADSR that controls the amplifier, crossfading between those 2 voice channels, velocity for the whole thing, and then a final filter on the end. There is a noise generator that sits in here that's part of my extra modules that I can pipe into the system, and then eventually a mixer and effects at the end. So it's a pretty full-featured instrument. So thank you so much for taking a look at my Doepfer Polyphonic modular system. It may very well be the largest of its kind. I haven't seen anybody else build one of these so big yet. Nobody's been as crazy as I am in terms of patching it all up. It certainly is a labor of love, but it's a very unique sounding and a very capable instrument because it's incredibly easy to interface with any other sorts of modular gear, and it's a very unique voice to have handy. Well, thank you so much for checking out my Doepfer Poly modular system. It's certainly been a labor of love, but I'm happy with the system so far. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube videos. Please consider joining my Patreon to help me in my patching experiments and to help me make more weird modular music. And happy patching to everybody out there, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.